Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Now let's get started with our first Dogman tale. The Dogman with steaming red eyes, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. I've had 3 things happen to me that felt as though they were paranormal. One was a poltergeist event I saw in my friend's kitchen where a salt shaker slid right off a table. A second was when I recorded myself doing a podcast, and while I was breathing in at one point, it sounded like there was an EVP of a man whispering the name Helen. Obviously, that's not my name, but according to my mother, the lady who owned the house before us was named Helen. But by far, the scariest paranormal thing that ever happened to me was when I saw a real Dogman. I bet some of you out there are wondering why I'm calling the Dogman paranormal. But if you had seen this thing, you wouldn't be asking that question. It was a beast straight from hell. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. This was the last weekend before my senior year at high school began. I was staying at my friend's house. Let's call him Evan, which is not his real name. His family is very rich compared to mine, and their house is in the middle of this forest. It takes 3 minutes to drive up their driveway to the house through the woods. There's all sorts of crazy wild stuff in that forest. Rock outcroppings, 3 caves that I know of, and a man-made cave that Evan and his family always insisted to me was there when they bought the property. They had no idea who built it or how old it was, but it was a tunnel cut into the rock that extended back a ways and ended in a natural stream flowing out of the rock itself. As amazing as that little cave was, I always wanted to get out as soon as I was in. It's not that the place felt evil. In fact, it seemed to be a holy site of some sort or another. It's just that nobody was able to tell if it had been built in the 20th century or if it had been built in extremely ancient times. There was something about that which frightened me back then. I think I was paranoid I might leave the cave and find myself in another century. The place felt powerful, but it was a power I couldn't be certain to be able to control. Of the natural caves, 2 out of 3 of them ended very quickly and had no side passages. The third one, though, led to an opening in the back which you had to walk through bent over. Once you got through it, though, it entered into a wider area which had more exits than we had dared to investigate. Neither of us had ever gone deeper than that second chamber, which was always hot, no matter the season. It was hot in the summer and in the winter. Since this was autumn when we went in there, it was hot. It was always hot there. Evan pointed at one of the holes in the cave wall on the opposite side of the chamber. He asked me if I could see something in that tunnel. I stared and I thought I was seeing something there, but I couldn't be sure. I shone my flashlight all around the opening, trying to angle the light to allow me to see deeper, but the tunnel seemed to turn at a sharp angle, preventing me from seeing much. I was about to tell Evan that I hadn't seen anything when I definitely saw something. Something that might best be described as a prehistoric dog's head was suddenly in the view of my flashlight, drooling, slobbering, and baring its fangs. The eyes of this thing looked like they were burning from the inside and were colored a dark orange that was nearly red. Smoke billowed out of the eyes as though they were actually made of burning coal. This was not just a big scary animal. This was a big scary animal from hell. I was so surprised I dropped my flashlight. Bending down and reaching around for it, I got my hand stomped on by Evan as he got his butt out of that cave. He also kicked my flashlight further away from me and closer to the prehistoric dog. I could now hear the creature growling, and my stomach did a flip. Abandoning the flashlight, I raced out of the cave, following the little glimpses of Evan's flashlight off the cave walls in the distance. I could hear the creature behind me, and I was crying. I didn't think I would make it out, and it was absolutely terrifying. I am very lucky my legs were running on adrenaline because I think the rest of me was nearly in shock. I got to the tunnel where I had to bend over to get through and dove in head first, running on all fours as quickly as I could through the narrow shaft. I was making pretty good time in the darkness with a glimmer of light off in the distance barely lighting my way. Then, I guess I moved up when I should have moved down, and I scraped my back against a sharp rock on the ceiling that I hadn't noticed in time. It was very painful for the first few seconds that I dropped down, enduring the pain until I could get used to it. My eyes were shut, and I was just focused on getting past the pain so I could resume my escape. I opened my eyes, and behind me, in the darkness, I saw eye shine. The pain minimized itself with another adrenaline rush, and I was off again, hugging the floor and trying to avoid hurting my back anymore. I could hear the creature getting closer. I could hear its breathing and its scuffling over the rocks and gravel behind me. I was crying and thinking that this was not how I wanted to die, and this was not where I wanted to die. I slid out of that tunnel, literally somersaulted, and was off running through the entrance chamber toward the outside world. When I got out, Evan was waiting for me like a good friend. I screamed at him that he was an idiot and told him to run. We both took off at our top speed. At one point there was a roar behind us, but it was fairly far behind. I risked taking a look behind me, and I saw the thing that I had first taken as a prehistoric dog. It was standing outside of the cave entrance, screaming at us, but it wasn't chasing after us anymore. And it also wasn't a dog, or it wasn't the kind that stands on all fours. This was a dogman. It stood like a man. It screamed like a wounded horse. It had a feral dog's head, claws larger than I'd ever seen on any animal, and smoking red burning coal eyes. I couldn't help myself. I just stopped and stared. I gawked like a tourist in Times Square. I was looking at a man-like thing that wasn't supposed to exist. It had grayish, brownish fur all over and pointed ears on top of its head. It was kinda shaggy, but fairly well kept for a demon dog. I don't remember ever noticing an odor from it, but then again, I was fortunate enough never to get too close to it. I wonder if it smelled like fire and brimstone. I'm open to suggestion if you can explain how that might not have been something paranormal or supernatural that we witnessed that evening. Do animals' eyes smoke in nature? Are there other creatures with eyes that seem to glow? What could cause that appearance on a creature? I don't really know how big this thing was, since at first I only saw the head, and then when I finally saw it in full, I was looking up a hill to see it in the distance. I feel like it was 6 feet tall, like the size of a fairly tall man. I can't swear to that though. It might have been larger or smaller. Maybe I'm superstitious or something, but if something lives in a cave underground, has red, steaming, smoking charcoal eyes, and has a dog head while walking on its hind legs, then maybe, just maybe, that's not a natural animal. And I don't even know exactly what I mean by that. What is natural as opposed to supernatural, really? I've got no answers, but I will probably always have a lot of questions about the Dogman with the steaming red eyes. Don't go away, we've got another Dogman story right after this.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
I think I might be a Dogman, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. I live in a new suburban development located near a small and old community of farmers. My family is friends with some of the families who have been here for generations. They tell us that their livestock and pets are being preyed upon by a very large wolf-dog hybrid that seems as comfortable walking around on its hind legs as on its all fours. One report said that the creature walked away from a farm with a young calf under each arm. Multiple reports state that the animal or entity seems unfazed by rifles being fired on it, even from a close range. Although it's hardly known about in our gated community, the people living on the farms nearby are all quite in a tizzy about this alleged monster. Nobody in my community who has heard of the beast thinks it's real. Not even my parents. But I know it's real. And I think it might be me. Now, I didn't pick up on all this until the third appearance of the beast, but all the sightings are clustered around the full moon. It's either the day of the full moon or the day before or after when people say he appears and menaces their families and livestock. I saw a movie on TV, not a documentary or a serious movie. I think it was on Svengoolie or something. In this movie, this guy changes into a monster when it's the full moon. And get this, the monster he changes into is part man and part wolf. So I was thinking, right from that point, that the creature might be a human who changed into the animal. I thought it would be a brujo or a shaman or a wizard of some sort doing it on purpose. Or else I thought it might be a curse placed on somebody. In either case, for some reason, I didn't entertain much thought about who it might be. I guess, coming from a big city, I assumed it would turn out to be someone I had never met. This creature, like the one in the old movie I saw, is basically humanoid and covered in hair. Unlike the monster from the movie, however, this one does not wear clothes when he is seen skulking about. The farmers don't think of it as a man, but as an animal, in part for this reason. The creature has a head much more like that of a dog or a wolf than the one in the movie did. Its snout is pronounced and long, ending in a dog-like black nose. Its fur is mostly gray, with darker and lighter parts throughout. Its ears stand up high on its head and dart about quickly, able to judge direction and proximity of the softest noises from the greatest distances. Its eyes are said to be cold and merciless. This is a thing that was born to kill and to eat. If it learned mercy, it would die the next day. It's pointless to hate it, and unwise not to fear it. A few months back, a girl in my school told me she saw the monster the night before, and she brought her cat inside. They both watched it through the window as it walked through her family's yard. She told me it stomped her mother's roses as it walked right through them, then seemed to scream in pain from the thorns. My arms had been covered in deep, fresh scratches that morning. I was stunned at the synchronicity. What were the chances that both the Dogman and myself were both scratched by a rose bush the night before? And it was especially weird how I didn't remember getting scratched. Life can be really strange, so I shrugged it off. I have nightmares now where I'm running on all fours and it's exhilarating. Then I encounter some stupid man, some little man, some man who thinks he's better than me. I stand up on my hind legs and I look down on him. He is so small, small enough for a snack. Look at him run. I bet I could catch him without even trying. I race after the man, and it doesn't take long to catch up. Soon, I have his neck in my sights. I know how to do it in one quick move while running at full speed. It won't take long. It's always over so quickly. I lean in, and that's when I always wake up, sweat pouring off of me, feeling in a complete state of panic. In my dreams, I'm the hunter, but I always wake up identifying fully with the prey. I wish they would catch the upright canid plaguing the community. I think it would make my nightmares stop. I woke up with chicken feathers in my bed last month. I woke up with broken eggs in my bed this month. Always on the full moon. Am I sleepwalking? Is it possible I might be sort of sympathetically sleepwalking because of the Dogman sightings occurring on the full moon? I mean, just because I find strange things in my bed the morning after the full moon doesn't necessarily mean I'm a wolf man. But I have to admit, I'm currently my own number one suspect. I don't think anyone around here believes in shape-shifting humanoid monsters. I think that even if people found their missing calves in my closet, they still wouldn't associate me with the monster they had seen in their fields. They might think I found the calves and brought them home, but they wouldn't think I was a shapeshifter. There are no superstitious people around here. I say that even while understanding the irony that this may be one of those few cases in which the superstition is more believable than the so-called reality. So what do I do? Turn myself into the werewolf police? Even if I tried to take the blame, I just don't think people would believe me. On the other hand, I don't want to hurt any animals, and the longer this goes on, the more the likelihood increases that I might hurt a person as well. This is all assuming I am actually turning into a wolfman or a dogman, and I don't actually know that for sure. I'm kind of at a loss. I don't know how I should proceed from here or what my main priority should even be. I can't afford to put locks and bars on my windows and doors, and I don't think my parents would allow that anyway. I'm really honestly just not sure what to do, but I better decide quickly before the next full moon.
OMG, lots more scary stories coming up right after this!
In the description of this video, we've got a link to our new Scary Stories t-shirt. It's our classic skull logo, and it says Scary Stories underneath in the kaiju monster font. It comes in black and also black and other dark colors such as black. Good for ladies or gentlemen, hoodies too, whatever you need. Oh, I also should plug the new Those American Girls album. It's got Madeline Starr on it and Patricia Howdigi and Colleen Great, and all the songs are written by Those American Girls. This one has no cover tracks on it. The title is Those American Girls Turn Off the TV, and you can get it from the link or links in the description. The witch who summons the Dogman, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. I come from Pennsylvania, and my grandmother and mother both used to tell my brother and me stories about werewolves and boogeymen when we were young. They were always cautionary tales. If you misbehaved, then either the boogeyman or the werewolves would get you. If you disobeyed your parents, then they would get you too. Sometimes you could do everything right and live a perfectly virtuous life, and still the werewolves and boogeymen would get you, just because life can be that way. This was the moral of every story. You'd better try not to get taken by monsters, but probably you'll get taken by monsters anyway. Now, in these stories and legends, the boogeymen were essentially like Bigfoot. I imagine them looking like the boogeymen from the Laurel and Hardy March of the Wooden Soldiers movie, and those look a lot like Bigfoot. Sort of primitive, violent, unintelligent proto-humans that are dangerous to be around. But they were natural to the area. Grandmother said they were here before the Native Americans got here. The werewolves, on the other hand, were a different kind of animal altogether. They were not werewolves like in the movies. They were not shapeshifters. They were not really animals at all, at least not in the conventional sense. These were something like demons, and they were summoned by the old witch in the woods. Grandma said the old witch was old even when Grandma was young, and she'll still be old when my grandchildren have grandchildren. That gave me the shudders. Grandma said the old witch made a new werewolf appear every time someone was cruel to someone else when they didn't have to be. So, each murder in the world creates a new werewolf, but so does every act of injustice, every door not held, every thank you not expressed. Even the most minor of sins created an undying, savage, vicious werewolf, according to Grandma and my mother. I thought I was a wise guy because I interpreted it to be meant figuratively. Each of our sins can snowball and become something much larger and worse and more grotesque than the worst sin we could have done in the first place. Living with integrity saved so much future suffering. It was metaphor. It was poetry. I thought it was brilliant, and that I was too. I was wrong in both cases. Mom and Grandma were just being literal, and they were warning me. So, one day I was taking a walk in the woods and I came across an old lady. She didn't look like something out of a fairy story. She wasn't wearing a torn dress out of medieval times. She was wearing a Gallagher 2 t-shirt and mom jeans, and she used a walker. Her hair was curly and white. Her hearing aid was prominent, and her look was annoyed. "What time is it?" she shouted at me, more in order than a question. I told her the time, whatever it was. She screamed that she couldn't hear me, so I held up my phone and let her read the time, then kept walking. She was already the most annoying thing in my day, and I just met her. "That was rude," she shouted, and I swear the skies darkened and thunder rumbled all around in 3D stereo quadraphonic. It was like something out of the corniest movie you ever saw, except it was real and it was very humbling. "You shouldn't ever be mean to old ladies," she screamed. You shouldn't, not ever, you shouldn't, not ever." She seemed to be having a fit. She was gyrating and doing little half spins from side to side. She looked like she didn't feel well. I wanted to help her, but then I realized she's crazy, and I'd be smart to get away from her immediately. So, staring over my shoulder at her, I walked away, and bam! That's right. I walked straight into a huge, upright, walking dog, then fell hard on my back, looking up at it. The lady had her eyes shut and was still mumbling angrily. The dog stared at me, and steam rose out of its eyes and nostrils, even though this was a warm night. I was helpless, laying there on the ground before this unimaginable beast. I remembered in detail every story I'd been told about the werewolves, and I cried, knowing I had never pictured them looking like this one did. It was like a husky, but with satanic eyes, evil, horrible eyes that denied the value of life itself, eyes that looked with disdain toward anything good or pure in the world. The great beast bent down and screamed in my face. I could smell years of rot from inside it, and I wanted to be ill and die. My life went past in chronological order, and I felt as though I were ready to go. Then, the monstrous dog stood up, turned around, and walked thunderously away to I know not where. I turned and looked at the witch, who was laughing. "Oh, the wolf, he's not going to hurt you," she kept giggling to herself like it was the funniest thing in the world. "He's born out of your sin. Now he's going to go hurt other people. Lots of other people." I got away from that evil old witch, and I try not to think of her ever since, but I do anyway. I know that somewhere in the world, no matter the time or day, there is someone experiencing misery. Misery born out of my sin. My one brief act of carelessness and thoughtlessness manifests and manifests over and over as ever increasing sadness and unhappiness. And it's all because of the witch who summons Dogman.
Have you heard our secret sheep squash story? If you were a paid subscriber, you would have. I'm about to record a story that our subscribers will hear a full week before any of the rest of you. If you want to help support this channel, just go to peterbernard.com and click on the PayPal donation button. That'll let you in on the weekly extras. See you next time on Scary Stories.
The Dogman that challenged my German Shepherd, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. When I was in my 20s, I had a great dog named Bessie who guarded our house for us. She was very fit and athletic and friendly, but she would turn absolutely savage in the case of someone trying to get on our property who didn't belong there. I never saw her back down from a fight, except for this one time I'm going to tell you about. The time when Bessie got challenged to a fight by an actual Dogman. That house had a small to medium-sized backyard surrounded by woods. We had no fence, but I would let Bessie out into the yard and let her play. She would do her business by bushes and cover it up, but she would never venture any further into the forest than that. She was a really smart and loyal dog, and we had a close and trusting relationship. So, one night when she was outside and I was inside, I heard her barking in the backyard. She sounded angry, but also alarmed. I didn't like to hear Bessie's alarmed bark. I had really only heard it 2 times before, I guess. One time when a pack of coyotes were checking us out from the woods, and another time when a bear stumbled upon our yard. Or maybe the bear story happened after this, I can't remember for sure. I think Bessie would have been around 3 or 4 when this story happened. She was quite fit, and although she had never been violent, I had no idea she could be if she were defending me or our property. So I rushed to get outside, wanting to shoo whatever it was away, before something unfixable got broken. When I got outside, I didn't have to wait long to find out what was causing the trouble. Standing right there, in front of the wood line, staring down at my furiously barking dog, was another dog. Guess. I mean, it sure looked like a dog head was on its body. The trouble was that its body didn't resemble a dog's body very much at all. I wondered if it was a guy in a costume, but it was too tall to be that, and the head seemed so real. Its ears moved the way a dog's ears would move, but its body was like a very, very tall, somewhat chubby man. It had long, shaggy fur all over, including on top of its head, where it flopped all over, covering its ears and eyes. Although my dog was extremely agitated, the immense standing man-beast just stood there with his tongue out, panting like any other dog would do, and watching my German Shepherd casually. The détente in the situation changed rapidly as Bessie lurched forward and took a nip out of the man-dog's front paw. First, the giant beast squealed in pain, sounding like a puppy, much smaller than itself, and it pulled back. Then, in a quick second, it got furious and roared at Bessie, taking a bite at my dog at the end of the roar, but missing. For the only time in her life, Bessie turned tail and ran. She ran right past me toward the house, and I realized I'd better get to the door to let both of us in. The dogman was running after us, and I could see how long its strides were by how quickly it covered the distance from those trees to our back porch. We got in literally seconds before the creature reached our door. I ran away after locking it, fully expecting the creature to break the door down and come in to end everything for me in my own home. But that's not what the dogman did. It sat down outside our back door and scratched at the door, like he was asking to be let in. I did not let him in. I ran up to my bedroom. I tried to find a window with a view looking down on the back door of the house so I could monitor what the creature did, but none of our upstairs windows had a good angle. So I just got quiet and I listened. I didn't hear anything happen for a long time, and eventually I realized the man dog had left at some point. When? I don't know. The next day or sometime after that, I got a tape measure to find out the height of this one branch I saw the creature stand next to, and it was 8 feet 2 inches. That seems impossibly tall, so maybe it was just an optical illusion from my angle that his head was the same height as that branch. But even if I'm off, that creature was much larger than an average man. Because of its shagginess, I don't really know if it was muscular. The fur made it look kind of round, but the front arms were clearly very strong, and the hind legs even stronger. Vince McMahon would have signed this guy to a lifetime contract in a second. It was the biggest man I'd ever seen or expect to ever see. And even though it looked friendly when it stood there panting, when it went for my dog, that was not play. It had the biggest teeth I've ever seen in my life, and they were clearly the teeth of a hunter, not a vegetarian. My dog and I are lucky we escaped unharmed from our encounter with the dogman that challenged my German Shepherd. I felt sorry for myself because I had no doorman. But then I met a man who had no scary stories, psychic Bigfoot versus savage Bigfoot paraphernalia. Did you know you could be wearing a psychic Bigfoot versus savage Bigfoot t-shirt right now? They come in white, black colors, long sleeve, short sleeve, little baby red sleeve, wife beater size, pregnant wife size. Plus, you can own a scary story, psychic Bigfoot versus savage Bigfoot hat, hoodie, journal, postcards, wall decals. All this can be yours right now by going to cafepress.com/scarystoriesnyc. Link is in the description.
Freshman Year Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Nancy Levonian. I attended a college on the western side of Pennsylvania, sort of near Ohio, West Virginia, and Maryland. We were around an hour drive away, or not even, from the Allegheny National Forest. In my freshman year, I was single-mindedly focused on preparing to major in environmental biology, coupled with the fact that I didn't know anybody in the entire school, and the result was that I spent a lot of my free time in that forest, alone. Since my parents had given me their old car, I was able to easily drive to the forest and back. Besides setting my surroundings, I did a lot of my schoolwork there as well. Back then, the only notebooks we had were the ones you wrote in with a ballpoint pen, and I used up the ink of a few pens in that forest. There was a time when I fell asleep there on a rock, though. That was really a fateful day for me personally, because that one mistake nearly cost me my life and completely changed my basic nature from then on. In fact, I don't know what basic nature is anymore since that night when I met. Well, let me start at the beginning. Okay, I was studying and writing, and I fell asleep on the big rock there, like I said. I was thinking about fairies and imagining a bunch of them dancing around me like in the old stories such as Rip Van Winkle. I remember waking up and reaching for a blanket but not finding any and realizing it was the dark of night and I was on a rock in the woods, an hour drive from my dorm. Immediately, fear shot through my heart. I don't think that would be my first reaction now that I'm an old lady, but back then, I was very afraid to do anything even slightly out of the ordinary. I wasn't so much alarmed that I might be in danger in the woods. I was afraid that I had been thrown off my schedule. I gathered my things and fussed about getting ready to trot back to my car when I heard a sound coming from the direction I needed to go. It was a sound that sent chills through me. There was a large animal, growling in the direction I needed to walk. I shivered all over. This time, I was not scared of being thrown off schedule. This time, my chills came because I realized I might be about to be removed from the schedule entirely. So my scientific mind tried to take over and reason through what might be making the sound. It could be a rabid dog, I thought. I had no real defense against any rabid animal except to run. It sounded like something large, whatever it was, and it sounded upset, but not necessarily at me. Maybe it was engaged in some sort of drama that I was overhearing. Maybe I could stay out of the fight and stay off its radar and get back to my car, all at the same time. My options were either to run away from it or to try and sneak around it, and I, being impatient, chose to try to sneak around the snarling unknown animal. So I foolishly took off in the direction of the sound of the growling predator. Needless to say, don't try this at home, not even in the name of science. I was walking not on the path, but in the trees and around bushes next to the path, trying to be as quiet as I could, struggling through the thickly overgrown woods. I was not dressed for that sort of thing, and when I tore my skirt, I'm afraid I lost my temper and cursed under my breath. All at once, the growling stopped. It was replaced by a sniffing sound. The animal had heard me and was smelling the air, trying to locate where I was. That was not a good development, needless to say. There was a crashing of the bushes and the tree branches, and I screamed. My eyes were tight shut and I fell to my knees, my hands held over me in a defensive posture. I could smell somebody's body odor directly in front of me, and I could feel the heat from their body in front and over me. Whenever my screaming stopped, all I could hear was it breathing from above me and in front of me. Whatever it was towered over me, breathing heavily. I opened my eyes and looked forward. I saw fur, filling my entire field of vision. I tilted my head back and looked up and up and up. And I'm telling you, I was kneeling before the tallest dog I had ever seen. It was sitting up at attention, but its head was further off the ground than a tall man's head. It had to be 6.5 feet tall while sitting. Not at the shoulder, but I mean from the ground to the top of its dog head. It had orange to brown fur, not particularly long, and it had floppy ears and big brown eyes. It wasn't growling anymore. It was just sitting there, sort of looking curiously at me, drooling and panting. Okay, so I've discovered a giant dog in Pennsylvania. I thought, I'm gonna be world famous. I decided to get my camera from my backpack and take photos. As I made a move to stand up, however, the huge dog became agitated and swatted me back down to the ground, hard. He was growling again, and his expression was no longer curious. I tried to crawl toward my bag, but he barked so loudly that it hurt my eardrums. Still agitated, the beast stood up on its hind legs and it towered over me. I never saw a look so evil on the face of any living creature before or since. It was just like a demon. It looked too intelligent to be acting that way, yet its evil overruled its intelligence. The creature screamed or howled or something at me. It sounded as pained as it sounded angry. I wept. I wept both for the dogman and for myself, and I was pretty sure I was about to meet my maker. But then the strangest thing happened. This group of people from my school happened to walk by at that precise moment, and they heard the howling. Shining a flashlight into the woods, they discovered the dogman, and 2 or 3 of them screamed. The dogman ran off, and I ran out to meet them. It turned out they were science nerds like me, and they had gotten lost trying to get out of the forest. I guided them to my car and drove them back to campus, and I stayed friends with all of them for years afterward. So I have dogman a thing for those friendships. None of us ever went back to that forest again as far as I know. The dogman we saw was just so tall, and it made it clear it did not like humans. The fear of encountering it again outweighs all scientific curiosity on my part. After that experience, I found myself terrified of the idea of being anywhere near the woods. I switched my major to business finance, and I have never regretted it. I still love to look at photos or videos of the forest. It makes me want to visit in person, but when I do, I find myself shivering all over and wanting to go home. It's strange I never realized the irony of this before. The most incredible environmental biology discovery I could possibly ever had made was exactly the thing that turned me away from environmental biology for good. If I had been able to prove my sighting, I would have become the world's most famous environmental biologist while still my freshman year at college. So maybe it's for the best that I can't prove what happened to me. I seem to have PTSD about the forest now, so what good would I be in that field? How could I study nature? By watching it on TV? The thing that I lost that day, the thing that the dogman took from me, was the feeling that I was on top of the food chain in nature. In school and in textbooks, you're taught about nature as though it were a fun product you order through the mail that comes with a set of instructions for setup and rules to play the game. The dogman overruled all of that in less than a minute and informed me the way it really is. We humans have built a network of cities and towns, with little roads stretching like ribbons between them. As long as we stick to those areas, we are sitting on top of nature. But if we choose to go out into the areas beyond our human settlements, then we had better do so respectfully. For out there, we are not in charge. Out there in the woods, we must bow our heads to the dominance of the dogman.
Did you know you can become a Scary Stories NYC paid subscriber for as little as $3 a month and get to hear secret scary stories that the public never gets to hear? It's true. Go to peterbernard.com to find out more.
Dogman. In my bedroom. As told to and read by Peter Bernard. Before you can understand the rest of this story, you need to understand that I have suffered my entire life from sleep issues. I get night terrors of various sorts, and I personally believe I get them in combinations previously undocumented by science. I would like to be studied, but have not yet connected with the right researchers. One of my unique issues is that I get sleep paralysis in different ways each time. I'm not a scientist, but I think this is rare. What I mean is, One night I might wake up in bed unable to move and see an old lady kneeling on my chest and laughing at me. Another time, it might be a shadow man standing next to the bed leaning over me and terrifying me as I'm paralyzed and unable to defend myself. I saw a creature that seemed to be a cross between a man and a spider hanging upside down from the ceiling in the corner of my room one night, looking at me through many red, unblinking eyes. One night, there was a laughing young woman wearing a torn dress. She just pointed at me and laughed, which was like torture. Then she pulled her own head off of her neck and disappeared as I was finally able to scream. I feel these are more than just imaginary events, but there was never any way to prove or disprove my suspicion about that, so I kept trying to convince myself that the scientists are right, and that this is just the mind continuing to dream while the body is awake. It is an answer that makes sense, and it explains why the body might be paralyzed, since they say our mind paralyzes us when we dream to prevent us from injuring ourselves moving about in our sleep. I kept telling myself the scientists had it right, but in my belly, I kept feeling that they had it wrong. So then, in my adulthood after I got married, the Dogman started appearing during my sleep paralysis episodes. I've seen faces peeking out of my closet. I've seen hands coming up from under my bed. I've seen monsters outside my window. But I had never seen anything as utterly horrifying as the Dogman that would appear in my room during a sleep paralysis. Most sleep paralysis events for me were over in 30 seconds or a minute, but the Dogman events, they just seemed to go on and on and on. When this entity would appear, after a while I would become utterly terrified just at the idea that I was going to have to endure this creature for some time before the episode would end. And no matter how much I told myself the whole thing was imaginary, there was no way to be less frightened of the Dogman. This was an incredibly tall thing. Sometimes its pointed ears brushed against the ceiling in my room. Its long, furry tail would switch around, knocking into furniture and making a little clicking noise as it did so. It was physically there. I was not imagining this. It was entirely covered in what seemed like black fur, except for its yellow glowing eyes, long teeth, and drooling tongue, which was always hanging out, panting. It breathed heavily, quickly, and roughly. Its saliva would drip and visibly puddle on my floor. It did not seem healthy, just as it did not seem natural. Sometimes it would go to pick something up and miss on its first try. It seemed disoriented somehow. I remember thinking that if this is my imagination, I have a very detailed one. The thing smelled like death. Are smells supposed to be part of sleep paralysis? This thing smelled, though. It would always kind of stagger drunkenly over to me, lean down low, inspecting my face inches away from me, panting and drooling all over me. The breath gagged me, but I couldn't physically cough or choke. I just breathed in the terribleness. Done with its up-close inspection, the thing would then go and destroy something in my room. It was always something that was dear to me in some way. The first time it appeared, it smashed my high school debate team trophy. The sound of the smash woke my wife up. As she sat up, the Dogman faded away, and I came out of my paralysis covered in sweat and Dogman drool. My wife would always think I had broken my own things in the night, and suggested I seek professional help. I tried to tell her that it wasn't me smashing my stuff. It was the Dogman from my sleep paralysis. Then, she insisted that I go seek professional help. My wife had gotten used to the sleep paralysis and had always been really supportive about it. When physical items started getting destroyed, though, she grew colder toward me. It seemed illogical since there was no way I could be destroying the items if I was paralyzed in bed. I think maybe she thought I was doing it in the middle of the night then pretending about it happening in the morning. Honestly, I'm not sure what she thought, but our relationship grew colder and colder. One time, the Dogman came and tore up important papers for my job that I hadn't scanned into my computer yet. This was a major screw-up and literally cost me my job. That didn't help my relationship either. I wanted to get a ghost hunting group in, but when I brought that subject up, my wife demanded I start seeing a shrink, or she threatened she was going to begin divorce proceedings. So, I was certain I was in a paranormal jam, but I was going to lose my marriage if I sought help for my problem. I started seeing her shrink, but I also went to a botanica and asked the lady there if she knew a solution to my problem. She pointed out candles I should buy, and I almost did. But I would have to burn the candles in my bedroom, and my wife would never allow that. I really didn't know what to do. So, the last time I saw the Dogman was almost 2 years ago now. This was the worst of all visits he made. It seemed to go on and on for 10 minutes or longer. He breathed on me. He scratched me on my chest in groups of 3. And it was excruciatingly painful, yet I couldn't move to defend myself. Then, the hideous creature went through all my belongings in the room, as though trying hard to decide what would be just the right thing to tear up. He went through my wife's clothing drawers, pulling things out and tossing them around in the room. He came back to me, as though he were making sure I was catching the show. Deciding I wasn't, he reached down and propped me up in the bed so I could have a better view of his final act. He took our wedding photo off the wall and slammed it to the ground. Glass shattered everywhere. My wife woke up. Waving goodbye to me, the Dogman vanished. Quite a poetic way to end my marriage, really. Gotta hand it to him. And yes, as you can imagine, that was the last straw for my wife, who is now my ex-wife, thanks to the Dogman in my bedroom. September Dogman Preview, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. Back in the 1970s, before most of cable TV had come into existence, there were no TV channels entirely devoted to children's programming. Most kids' TV was on in the afternoons after school, which was cheap local programming and reruns, or Saturday morning, which was network national TV and featured brand new shows which would debut each September. So to lighten the horror of going back to school, we would get to look forward to the new cartoons coming on Saturday morning. There would be big 2-page ads taken out in our favorite comic books, and we would check what shows were on against which, and plan which channels we would have on at what time. I remember even writing it down on paper. Sometimes if I wanted to watch 2 shows that were on against each other, I'd ask a friend to watch one and I'd watch the other. Then, we'd report back to each other and use that info to determine the important decision of which show we would watch the following week. So you can imagine my surprise when one of my uncles got cast as a character in a Saturday morning preview special. Oh wait, I guess I should explain what a Saturday morning preview special was. See, each September, usually 2 out of 3 of the networks would put on a half-hour special airing the Friday night before the big debut Saturday morning. It would usually star someone that had nothing to do with any of the shows, like Burns and Schreiber, but then they would have characters in costumes playing the cartoon characters. They'd hang out with the hosts and show us a preview clip of their show which would air in full the following morning. I would take notes during all of these specials and review my notes carefully afterward. So anyway, my Uncle Vito, not his real name, got cast to play a certain superhero I shan't name in a Saturday morning preview special. He got to introduce a clip of a certain superhero cartoon from that era. I loved seeing Uncle Vito on TV, but as a kid, it bothered me that he didn't sound anything like the character in the cartoon, and he didn't look much like the character either. But still, it was my Uncle Vito, and I was very proud of him. We called him on the phone the next afternoon. This was back in the day when an entire family would call someone. He wanted to talk to me personally, and he told me to take the phone away from the rest of the family. My mom gave me permission to use the phone in her bedroom, and she hung up after I got the call upstairs. So, my uncle told me that he had seen Bigfoot. He knew I was really interested in Bigfoot. He made me swear to secrecy before telling me the story, though. He said the rest of the family would think he was crazy. And if people thought he was crazy, he wouldn't get hired, so this had to be just between the two of us. That was fine by me, so he told me this story, which is not at all about a Bigfoot, as it turns out. At least I don't think so. Okay, this literally happened to Uncle Vito on the way driving home from shooting the September Saturday morning preview show. He'd gotten lost getting back on the highway and was driving through an area of California he was unfamiliar with, on a narrow, winding road passing through an area heavily wooded with tropical fruit trees, palm trees, and deciduous trees. When he was telling me the story, he was explaining that he was fascinated by the variety of trees all in one area, and that's probably why he noticed the creature that was inside the tree line. It was as large as a bear and brown, but it appeared to be running far faster than any bear could run, and it was running on its hind legs. Uncle Vito said it felt like the world turned sideways, upside down, and in on itself. Nothing made sense any longer. The creature was running down an incline toward the road, and it looked like it might run smack into Uncle Vito's car. He had to decide quickly whether to speed up and try to get past the thing, or to slow down and let it pass at a safe distance in front of him. He told me he wasn't sure he could pass it in time, and he'd always wanted to see a Bigfoot, so he decided to stop well short of the creature, say 100 or 150 feet away, and wait idling in the road for it to pass. The thing is, as he slowed down, the creature turned more in his direction. The slower he got, the further to its left the creature turned. No matter what he did, that thing was heading straight for his car. I asked him to continue, and he said he was trying to, but he had to tell me something that he wasn't sure I was ready to hear. It was a struggle to get him to continue, and it looked like he was having great difficulty speaking. Finally, he just blurted it out. "Bigfoot doesn't look like they show him on TV," he said, looking at me pitifully. He seemed to be in great emotional pain over this whole sighting. I asked him, "Well, Uncle Vito, what does Bigfoot look like then?" He had a really hard time saying it, because he knew I would be surprised. But he told me, "Bigfoot has a head much more like a dog than like an ape." Okay, that did surprise me, and I let out a laugh at the time. That was the worst thing I could have done, because it made Uncle Vito clam up. and it was the last he spoke to me about the subject for over a year. I regretted laughing almost immediately, but his reaction assured me that he was utterly sincere. He wouldn't have been so upset at my laughing if he had been joking around. So, a year or two later, I caught him at a family gathering when he was in a mellow mood. I eventually got him comfortable enough that he was willing to finally tell me the rest of the story about what he was calling Bigfoot, but which sounded much more like some sort of werewolf-type creature to me. I didn't use the word werewolf at the time, either out loud or in my head. I think I actually thought of it internally as a dogman or man-dog. I hadn't heard the term dogman yet back then, and I didn't think of upright walking canids as werewolves either. I thought a werewolf was a fictional creature from old Abbott and Costello movies. So the word never entered my head, but I still immediately thought my uncle had seen something other than Bigfoot. So to pick up the story from where we left off, the dog-headed hairy monster was racing toward Uncle Vito's car, no matter what speed he drove at. He probably should have sped up, but illogically, he slowed down to a stop, and soon the creature was directly in front of his car, facing him and blocking the road. Uncle Vito told me that Bigfoot barked at him like a dog, but with the deepest voiced bark he'd ever heard. He said he felt insane at that moment, sitting in his car and staring out at a dog-headed Bigfoot. He told me the strangest thing I'd ever heard. He said he wished at that moment that he could faint. He just didn't want to be there anymore and wished he could be unconscious or asleep. Considering that the creature could have killed him then, and he would have been defenseless, I figure that monster must have been remarkably ugly and frightening looking. So the rest of the story is just one surreal dream. The creature did things in front of the car to terrify my Uncle Vito, yet stayed right there in front. It didn't attempt to break in, and it didn't attempt to kill him. What it did was stand tall and shout, then bend forward and bark. It pounded on the hood of the vehicle. It kept my poor uncle completely terrified for over 10 minutes. He wept in his driver's seat, and he wet himself, and he told me he was convinced he was a goner. Then, suddenly, the creature just turned away and walked into the bushes off of the side of the road. Gunning the engines, my uncle drove out of there, crying like a little baby. I was amazed and impressed by the story and immediately had a theory. Maybe the creature fed off of his fear. My uncle thought that was a dumb idea because he was certain he was encountering a predatory carnivore. I told him that it's a standard theory about ghosts that they appear to frighten people, then feed off the fear their appearance generates. My uncle grew furious at me and shouted, "This was no ghost." Maybe not, but I still don't think that what he encountered was a natural animal either. I think it was something that manifested in order to scare him and feed. When it had its fill, it left. I could be wrong, but that's just my take on his story. Oh, a few years ago, I went on a Dogman kick, watching every Dogman video I could find on the internet and sending most of them to my uncle. I asked him if he ever noticed the back legs of the creature. Were they Bigfoot-style legs or Dogman-style legs? He didn't answer my emails, but I saw him at Thanksgiving, and he told me honestly he didn't remember the legs at all. He just remembered seeing it running very quickly. He did think that I might be right, and it might have been a Dogman and not Bigfoot. At the time when it happened, he had never heard of Dogman, so he just called it a Bigfoot and thought Bigfoot had a dog head. He disagrees with me to this day about the creature being paranormal, though. He says that what he saw was flesh and blood, and that's the only thing he knows for sure about it. He doesn't know why it went for him and shouted at him, but he thinks it might be that he was invading the creature's turf. He thinks the creature backed off and left after realizing he was no threat. He doesn't think we need to go to the paranormal to explain what happened to him, but I still differ. At least we talked it out, and we're friends again, and I guess that's the most important part. It turns out, playing that superhero that time was the biggest appearance on TV of my uncle's life. He did a couple or 3 commercials after that, but they were local to his area and I didn't get to see them. He never appeared on national TV again. Be that as it may, I, for one, will never forget the year my Uncle Vito got a first-hand, up-close, September preview of the Dogman.
Check out the audio podcast version of Scary Stories NYC, now available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and other popular podcatchers. Bigfoot Attacked My Tiny House. Scary Stories by Peter Bernard, Volume 1, now available on Amazon in paperback.
Come back for more scary stories.